thank you for being here. Whether this is your first event with Red, Wine, and Blue, or you've been to more than you can count, you are welcome here. We're so glad you're with us tonight. My name is Katie Paris. I am the founder of Red, Wine, and Blue, which in just a few short years has become a community of nearly 500,000 women across this country who are united together in our fight against extremism. We come from all kinds of backgrounds, but none of that matters. What matters is that we are all here together now. Now, we have had many events at Red, Wine, and Blue, but this one tonight, it may be the most personal event for me that we've ever had. That's because our special guest tonight is calling in from Asheville, North Carolina. And Asheville, North Carolina is a place that I was raised from age 8 to 18, still have many close family there. And our guest tonight is the granddaughter of US Senator Jesse Helms. He was the longest serving senator in North Carolina. He was known, of course, for his record of being anti-women's rights, anti-LGBT rights, anti-reproductive rights, anti-civil rights. And while our guest tonight grew up with him as her grandfather, appearing even in his political commercials, volunteering on his campaigns, I, at the same time growing up in North Carolina, was working for Jesse Helms' opponents at a young age. I was volunteering for Harvey Gantt, who was the mayor of Charlotte, who was running to unseat Jesse Helms. So our guest tonight and I, growing up in North Carolina at the same time, we're having very different experiences. But tonight, we are united in purpose. And I am completely in awe and in gratitude, filled with so much gratitude for Ellen Gaddy, who's joining us tonight, Jesse Helms' granddaughter, for making the decision that for herself, for her daughter, for all the women and all the people of this country who have been impacted by the negative legacy of Jesse Helms' policies, that she is going to use her voice to help heal. In fact, that she knows her own healing is dependent on her helping to heal others as well. So this is deeply personal for me. We both come from North Carolina. We're here together tonight, and it's also so timely. In Ellen's state of North Carolina, just this week, legislators have proposed a total abortion ban. And that has such serious consequences in North Carolina, as it does everywhere. But North Carolina is the one last safe haven in the South for reproductive rights. We also are going to be joined here tonight by women from Wisconsin and Ohio, and that's for a specific reason. Wisconsin votes in 5 days in their Supreme Court election, and that election is going to determine whether or not the statewide abortion ban stands in that state. If you know anyone in Wisconsin, pay attention. You're going to want to be in touch with them after you hear more about this tonight. And then also we have women from Ohio, which is where I live now. Again, the reason why this is so personal for me, where we are fighting to put reproductive freedom on the ballot, as it has been in other places across this country and has been consistently winning because we are the majority. Now, of course, opponents are doing everything that they can to try to thwart those attempts, but we are binding together to make sure that in the end that our rights prevail. And what we know that sometimes I think our opponents just don't quite get because they can't see it, is that an entire movement of women has been galvanized since the Dobbs decision almost a year ago. We are a powerful movement of women who know that this is reproductive rights. This is not actually a partisan issue. It's a personal one. So I know that this issue is not just personal to me. I know that this event tonight is not just personal for me. It is personal for all of you because of our life experience, because of the experiences of our family members, our friends. And I know that we've been sharing those stories deeply tonight. So that's what I hope tonight can be, a lot of sharing personal stories and giving us direct opportunities to take some real action. So welcome again to this special night at Red, Wine, and Blue. And with that, I would like to welcome to join me, Ellen Gaddy, Jesse Helms' granddaughter, calling in from Asheville, North Carolina.
Hi, everybody.
I'm so happy to see you. I feel like we haven't known each other for that long, but I'm already looking forward to hanging out with you when I'm in Asheville this summer. So we're getting together.
We have like a lifelong friendship. I know it.
I know. I'm really so happy about that. So, Ellen, why don't you share with us, just some of, what was it like to grow up with Jesse Helms as your grandfather?
Sure. You mentioned that the personal is political, but for me, the political has always been so deeply, viscerally personal. From a very young age, I would say around the age 4, I would see political campaign signs for my grandfather's opponent in people's yards, and I would say, those people hate me. And that is a lot for a 4-year-old to wrap their head around. But even at that age, I understood that he was a deeply polarized and polarizing individual, that people either loved him or they hated him. And I thought that because of that, that people either loved me or hated me. So it always felt like growing up, even though for years I grew up in that worldview and I believed those things growing up. But there was always this very visceral awareness that every time he would say something offensive, which was all the time, it would land physically in my body. And I think that's women were very empathetic. We feel it that way. And so there were so many times where even though it's like I was on a split screen, even though I was growing up in the political limelight, on the campaign trail, going to an endless string of political functions and fundraisers and really buying into the worldview. There was that part of my life, but there was also this part where each time he would say something hurtful and it would land in my body. It was it was setting up these dominoes, one after another. And then all it took was going away to college and kind of getting out of the house, out of the worldview. And I was studying geology, studying the sciences, and I was taking this fantastic geology course about the crystalline structure of rocks and minerals. And there was something about just the beauty and all of the geometry of it, where the sacred and science just kind of merged together as one. And it opened up the world for me in a way that wasn't it was this huge, aha moment, but it's it was just this little flick where I just did that and the dominoes all fell. And I realized I did not believe what I had grown up in, and that I wanted to take the time necessary to really sort out what I did believe. And eventually that led to how can I push back on this political legacy that I have inherited that I don't agree with, that is deeply harmful, and is especially harmful to women. And that took a long time, but that was the start of it.
I can imagine sort of just you feeling that in your body. It sounds like it was so much of it must have felt very visceral, but then it's a whole nother thing to give voice to those things. You're doing that in a big way tonight. You have done that in a few other venues, and we're so grateful that you're going to just keep doing that more. The women of North Carolina and all around this world need you. But what were the challenges as you first started to do that, and kind of what kept you moving forward? Because I think sometimes when we step out of our comfort zone, we go right back in it because it doesn't feel so good.
Sure. One, I'm just deeply curious by nature, so that helped. And also, he was in office for 30 years. And you already mentioned his political platform. And so there was a whole lot to unpack there. And as I was coming out of fundamentalism and extremism, and I wanted to really examine the legacy, I knew that I needed help. I knew I needed help. And I knew also from a very I had that understanding, because it was so physical for me and visceral for me, that I knew that it wasn't just about my individual process of healing and transformation. I understood that had to be that I was rooted in society and in culture, and that in order to really heal myself and heal the legacy, I would have to kind of create, figure out some way of form of activism in partnership with my individualized healing process, so that I could move forward in this reconciliation process. And so I actually picked academia as the container for this healing process. And I once heard a woman who works on the ground in Africa on FGM, female genital mutilation / cutting, and how she was trying to figure out how to end that practice. She once said that she went to education and she got her BA, she started with her BA, and that wasn't enough to figure it out. She then went on to her master's and then went on to her PhD. And it took all of those to really understand the issue and how to help. And so I had a very similar process. Like I started studying psychology and social transformation at the undergraduate level in Seattle, and then moved on to California, where I received my master's and PhD in liberation psychology, and which is an activist-oriented psychology, which is really looking at how you heal self and society in tandem. And I was so lucky to be on the West Coast for one, and then also have teachers and mentors who every point along the way really held me in this process, and not only held me in the process, were like, you have to do this and you can't stop doing this, and we're going to be here to support you all the way through this. And I was so profoundly lucky, and I'm so profoundly grateful for my teachers at both Antioch University, Seattle, and at Saybrook University in California, for giving me that safe space that I needed to heal myself and really decide what issue I wanted to push back on. And while I was completing my PhD, I was really looking at the Helms Amendment, which, for those of you who don't know, my grandfather, when his very first year in office in 1973, he introduced the Helms Amendment as part of the Foreign Assistance Act. And it hinders all U.S. aid funding from going to support abortion care globally and in countries that are recipients of U.S. aid. And it's been interpreted by every single presidential administration since 1973, that would have been Nixon, as an outright ban on abortion, even in cases of rape, incest, and threat to the mother or pregnant person's life. And so what I learned along the way was that millions, I think 35 million women resort to unsafe abortion each year globally. 19 million of those are in countries that receive U.S. aid. And then of that, millions have long-term injuries as a result, and thousands of women die each year from unsafe abortion. And so if you take that number, that's the current number, and like we multiply that over 50 years, that is a devastating amount of women that we have lost to unsafe abortion. And so I understand, because my process of healing is deeply individualized, but also linked to healing and pushing back and transforming culture, society and culture. I've always understood that I can't fully heal myself unless I'm doing something to help those women who die each and every year from unsafe abortion globally because of the Helms Amendment.
Wow.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's incredibly powerful. And you're touching a lot of people who are hearing you so fully in the chat, Ellen. Did you ever talk with your grandfather about your shift in views?
Not about abortion. I moved away when he was at the tail end of his time in office. And I think the only random thing that I ever pushed back on was when I was studying geology. We got in a discussion about how I told him that drilling for tar sands, like if we did that here in North Carolina, that it would harm the environment. And he told me that it would not. And I was like, but yes, it will. And that was the one thing that, like, random thing that I pushed back on. And he actually said later to my grandmother that Ellen doesn't love me.
Oh, okay.
And that's not okay. That's not an okay thing to say. Like, think about the guilt and the shame where, one, he probably did not care at all what I thought. I mean, he had his whole political career. But to kind of like put it back on me, like, oh, you don't like me, and because you think something different than I do.
What an interesting experience. And I think it's so consistent with a lot of the stories I hear of women who have come from, more conservative backgrounds. And ultimately, I think there has to be some choice making of where am I going to put my energy? Is it going to be into the people who are not going to hear my experience with an open heart and mind, who are going to deny basic facts, that I try to share with them in a respectful manner? Or am I going to take all of who I am and everything I'm learning and try to show my light in the world in ways that can help heal, which I feel like is the choice, you have made. And I think that ultimately we all have a certain amount of energy to give out there in the world, and figuring out how to increase it. That makes a lot of sense to me, the choices that you've made. Have you found, because of your connection to your grandfather, that people make assumptions about you sometimes? Has that been part of your journey as well? And how have you dealt with that?
Well, early on in North Carolina, before I left, of course, everyone would assume that I believed exactly what he believed. But once I moved out west, and I was very open, with everyone who I was, and that I was working on a reconciliation process, I found most people to be very, very supportive. And then, of course, moving back to Asheville, we're just kind of like a liberal island here in Western North Carolina. And I've also found people to be very supportive and to not make too many assumptions, which has been interesting.
Right. I'm glad to hear that. Okay. So Ellen, you have a daughter. How do you talk to her about her great-grandfather and what his legacy means to you? How do you process that together?
She's at a progressive school, and so she understands all things progressive way better than, it took me into my 20s to figure out what she learned at 5. And I'm very open with her. I'm like, you through me have inherited this political legacy also, and it ends with me. So I'm doing something different so that you can do something different also. And she understands, she knows what abortion is. She understands what it is. And she understands that women have the right to choose what they do with their bodies. And she understands that her great-grandfather, my grandfather, didn't want her to have that right, and didn't want women anywhere in the world to have that right. And she understands that that's not okay. And so she's deeply supportive of me. And in fact, we just watched the little segment that was on the local news, and she was doing and it's just beautiful that at that age, it's just like they understand. I think my daughter's generation, they're not going to take this for a second. And so all we need to do as moms is just keep on modeling to them how to fight.
Can I tell you how much it means to me to know that you were on WLOS tonight, the local news station I grew up watching, as a child, and now that you got to go on and talk about that you're doing this event tonight with my organization, just talk about full circle. It's so moving to me, Ellen. Tell us about your concerns living in North Carolina, raising a daughter, given this all-out full abortion ban that was proposed this week in your state.
It's terrifying. I mean, the total abortion ban, it's cruel. It is not okay for women to have restrictions on their bodily autonomy and to not have reproductive justice and freedom. And it's scary. It's scary that my daughter could come into a state in a world where she has less power to determine her future than I did coming through North Carolina. I'm here. I'm deeply committed to speaking out and to making sure that we keep abortion safe and legal here, and that we push back on that abortion ban. And I think we will be successful in that fight. We're
going to bring Ellen back on in a few minutes. But right now, what I want to say, and some women, I'm so glad you have my heart, those of you who are asking, so what can I do about it? Especially if I live in North Carolina. Red, White, and Blue has an amazing, badass team of suburban women organizers all across North Carolina. And they have created a rapid response squad. So if you are interested in being someone who's really in the know as this kind of legislation is pushed through the legislature, and you want to know what are those moments that I need to actually do something, who do I need to contact, what do I need to say? If you want to be in on that and really part of the Power Squad in North Carolina, I know that Janice and her team, Janice Robinson leads our team in North Carolina. She lives outside Charlotte. and we've got women all across the state. So they're going to be dropping links right now, where Angela just dropped one right now. But that you click on that link, Angela just dropped. She's on the North Carolina team too. She knows a lot of our Asheville women. Click on that link, sign up so that they can keep you in the loop. We are here to support you in using your voice. And if that feels right for you, sign right up and we've got you. Okay, so Ellen, we're going to be bringing you back on. I love what you said about it ends with me. And that means so much coming from you, but I think all of us can say that too by using our voices and to be a part of that with you. And the more of us who say that, the louder it gets. And so you North Carolina women, please follow that link and let it end with you too. Okay, so now we're going to bring on someone who is also a deeply personal friend of mine, someone I've known longer than Ellen, but I know that we could all hang out together any night of the week now. So I do want to bring on Sister Simone Campbell. And you all might have heard, who here, raise your hand in the chat, say if you've heard of the nuns on the bus. These were the nuns who rode all across the country in a bus, spreading the good word about Obamacare, about the Affordable Care Act, when that was coming through. They were the ones saying, this is a pro-life piece of legislation because it will save lives. And that's how they were talking about healthcare. And it is one of the big reasons that healthcare reform did indeed pass. So this woman here tonight with us is going to talk about her background coming from a very religious community. I think that people make assumptions, right, about when you hear somebody's a Catholic nun. They make assumptions about what somebody's views might be. But I want to talk to Simone and bring her into this conversation tonight from the Catholic perspective as someone who identifies as pro-life, but very much shares Ellen's views and my views when it comes to reproductive freedom. Sister Simone, people ask me this about you all the time. And, when I go, oh, well, she's pro-life, they've got it all wrong. She's really pro-life. The people are saying they are, they're not really. And I love hearing you talk about this. So tell all of us here tonight why you consider yourself pro-life and unabashedly a supporter of reproductive rights.
Well, I think that the thing that is so challenging is exactly what Ellen was talking about, is getting to the center of yourself and finding that integrated space where it's not just a soundbite, but what do I care about? I care about the life of everyone. And Pope Francis, a couple of years ago, wrote an article in which he said that equally sacred is the care for the poor, for the marginalized, for the destitute, for those who are left out. Equally sacred is the care for our planet. And so if we're going to really have a faith that embodies all of life, then we've got to break out of this crazy binary that it's just about controlling women's bodies. That is wrong. Now, I guess I want to, if I can, Katie, step in, because how did I get here? I got here because when I was practicing law in California, I got appointed to represent this 13-year-old girl in a family law matter. And she had been raped by her uncle and was pregnant. And my job as her lawyer was to walk with her through that reality, through those decisions. And that forever changed me because it brought me to see her as this young girl struggling with what does life mean? And how could I not open up myself to the deeper story of how do we nurture life in all things? And so that was the beginning of my journey. So my biggest message is, figure out where you are and what matters to you and speak of it. My heart is full for the women making choices that fit their needs, their lives, their families. And that is the heart of it.
What strikes me so much about just the way my body feels inside, listening to both you and Ellen, is just that genuine openness of what is going on inside your heart and mind, as opposed to just that this is what I believe, anyone else is wrong, I'm shutting it all down. Instead, opening yourself up to and letting other people in. essentially, and being willing to be impacted by the life of, that girl and her lived experience, instead of having just that tunnel vision that, nothing is going to ever change what I was taught. It's really powerful. It's sort of a simple thing. And I think sometimes it's easier said than done, but it's just a whole radical mindset, I guess, really.
Well, it takes courage. It takes courage to do that journey, but to know that it's worth it. I mean, Ellen's a great witness to that. Hopefully I am too, that it is worth the effort to figure out it is not a binary, either or. This is about the complexity of life. Let's engage it.
So Simone, you have traveled all around the country listening to people from all different backgrounds, particularly you've spent a lot of time in rural areas, just like I think people often stereotype what a nun is supposed to be. People who live in rural areas sometimes are stereotyped for what they're supposed to be. Absolutely. And when you have had conversations where the issue of abortion, reproductive rights comes up, have you ever had any success sort of finding some common ground, meeting in this sort of personal heart-mind space that you're talking about?
Well, the biggest success I've had is not in changing minds, but it is in at least connecting, helping people see the complexity. And I remember doing a town hall where, and we had a couple hundred people and got engaged in a dialogue in front of everybody. That was a little intimidating, but and it was a guy. The thing that drives me a little nuts, since we're red, white, and blue, it's the guys that want to make this argument, which is it like, really is. please. But anyway, it was with a guy, but tried to get him to talk about what he cared about. How did he express his care and concern for his partner and worried about her? And by getting to him to talk about what he worried about, I felt like the door opened just a teeny bit for him to see her not just as this rigid person on whom he was to impose his view, but rather to see a bit of the complexity. It was as close as I got.
Well, that whole creating that initial opening, though, I think is the goal, right? I don't think anyone, Ellen talked about dominoes as a metaphor. Oftentimes, I think when people talk about having changed their mind, it's lots of little things over time. It's rarely one, moment at a town hall or even, any conversation, any single conversation. It is opening that door and just opening it a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And so I think what you did was
to have it pulled open by some event. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
But the thing, can I just want to add one thing,
please.
Katie, that the critical thing is for us to be authentic and speak from our hearts, not from our talking points. And I think that is where the shift happens, is when we're authentically ourselves and speak of what matters.
So what you're saying is we're not supposed to go along with what might be the stereotypical, the nuns we hear are taught in Catholic school, a very strict mindset of at the dinner table, we should only be polite, certainly not discuss politics or faith, religion, anything like that. So are you saying something different from that? Is that, tell me how okay.
I'm trying to say, let's speak of our hearts and what matters. And make that dinner table conversation to say, well, what matters today? Where is my heart in all of this conversation? And then to invite a diversity of perspectives so that we can listen, and we might get changed in the process too. Sometimes I think when I'm more insecure, I'm more rigid in my thinking, and therefore I don't want to hear another point of view. But what we really, in this time in our nation, we have got to open our hearts so that we talk about the reality, not the political stereotypes. And Ellen's breaking out of this from her family history. Let us break out of it within our religious and our family traditions. That's all. Just speak your truth.
Simone, you always make me want to speak my truth. There's no question about it. I know that, again, people hear, someone comes from a Southern fundamentalist background or, a Catholic background, certainly a nun. And there's a lot of assumptions made about what that means for who that person is and what they're going to stand for. And I think the more that we can just be authentic and speak our truths, those stereotypes are so unhelpful. They get in the way of us knowing each other's true and authentic selves. So
Absolutely.
thank you for being someone to stand in the, I know that you have put yourself out there in ways and withstood, criticism from people, frankly, like Jesse Helms. And
Right.
but you stand out there, and it gives the rest of us so much courage to do it too.
Well,
So,
criticism only hurts if there's some truth in it. So if people just stereotype me, there's no truth in that. Forget it. It doesn't hurt.
I love you, Simone. Okay. All right. We're going to bring Simone back here too in a moment. But now I do want to transition to bring on a couple of women from our community out there from Ohio and Wisconsin. I mentioned that there's very important things going on in Ohio and Wisconsin, but what these two women have in common, certainly with Ellen, is while their grandfather was not Jesse Helms, they did indeed come from very conservative families. And that's what we're talking about tonight, that, it's okay to change your mind. It doesn't matter what your background is. What matters is that we're all here together now. Hi, it's so good to see you guys both again. Okay. So I want everybody to get to hear your personal stories as well, because I just know, it's so inspiring to me. I hear people in the chat being inspired, and also it resonates with so many people who also share, coming from a different background, getting to where you are today. That's not always easy. And I think the more we share these stories, the more we get that community of support. We need that community of support to keep going. So, okay. So Jen, why don't we start with you? Can you talk about, you're in Wisconsin.
Yep.
We've gotten to know you through Motherhood for Good, which is such an awesome group of women who are doing so much good advocating on these issues, really speaking out to make sure that reproductive freedom can be protected as a consequence of this Supreme Court race y'all have on Tuesday. And we're so happy to have you here, and you share something with Ellen in terms of coming from that more conservative background. Can you talk about, what personal experiences in your life, or if there were any moments that kind of led to the journey of change and kind of what brought you here?
Yeah. Well, first of all, this is my first event with you, and I was not prepared to cry, which I've already done a few times, because Ellen,
you about that.
Simone, what you have said, everything you have said just strikes me so deeply. I grew up in a really conservative family. And when I say conservative, I mean a very evangelical religious family. So that was always first and foremost. And everything political kind of fell in line, right? It was the 1980s. It was a really great time, to be an evangelical Christian because of Jerry Falwell and Ronald Reagan. And my parents were products of the 60s and 70s. And I think that they were looking for something in Christianity. This form of it is kind of what they stumbled upon. So I just remember, it was your typical men are the head of the household and they make all the decisions, and women are emotional based and we make decisions because if we're emotional. And everything was just always tied to shame and guilt. And I look at all of these issues that we're talking about and how much shame our society puts on the issue of abortion and women who are going through these very personal things, and how it's all tied to shame. So I grew up curious, but I never really questioned anything because I didn't know any better. I come from a small town in Wisconsin, and that was really all I knew. And I do remember when I was in high school, our church had an outing to a pro-life rally, which is funny to call that an outing. But I remember going and just being horrified that I was there, but I didn't know why, because I didn't really understand. I remember this carload of girls from my high school drove by and spotted me, and they're like, "Oh, I know who you are." And I felt so much shame at being there. And I think as I grew up, as they moved away from my small town, as they kind of came into my own and started to figure out what was important to me, I think that shame was tied to, I don't want to be here because I don't think that this is the right way to go about things. I don't think that abortion is something that is so black and white. I think there are so many stories that go into it. And so that was really kind of my coming into my own, I guess you could say.
That's so powerful. And just your recognition, I think, we as women, like, shame is such a part of our conditioning. And I think unlearning that is so much of the work that we have to do, and supporting each other in that unlearning is such a key part of being in community together. So thank you for naming that, because we've all been there and felt that in our own ways, and know the powerful hold that it can take of us. But then when we notice it and recognize that as an obstacle, I think there's a lot of power in being able to, once we see it, moving it out of the way and finding the power in our voices. So thank you for naming that, Jen. Crystal, my dear friend Crystal from Ohio. Crystal lives in the Columbus area of Ohio, and you also have a background maybe sort of similar. Tell us a little bit about Crystal, how you grew up, and little thing to know about Crystal is that not only did she sort of have a change in view, she has even run for state senate in Ohio, very much as a champion for reproductive freedom, and is part of now working to put reproductive freedom on the ballot with so many of us here in Ohio. But Crystal, can you share a little bit about what may have been similar or different from your upbringing to Jen's, and what might have been some of the moments that things started to shift for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like I could just hit copy paste of Jen's upbringing, and that would describe very much how I grew up. The only thing dissimilar, maybe not, we'll see, is that my church was so conservative and evangelical that they got placed on the State Department's watch list as like a budding cult. And so that was very intense. And I remember being in church where we were having these conversations about what we do about this. And it was like, well, I guess we should make tithing or like donating to the church non-compulsory. So it's an option now, optional. And we will allow women to not wear head coverings during prayer. Again, that will be an optional thing that we do now. And that got them removed from the State Department's watch list. So I definitely identified, Jen, with the shame and the guilt of ever even giving myself the space to think differently. And I knew really from a pretty young age, I would say maybe that like preteen time, like 10, 11, 12, where I really started to kind of scratch my head and was like, this doesn't all shake out for me the way that I think it should. And that came to me in the form of just peer pressure and bullying from my church community. I went to public school. I was very happy at public school. Everyone in my church was homeschooled. And so they really gave me a hard time about it, enough so to the point where we were at summer camp one time and they put a sign on my door that said "die" in huge letters, and then in teeny tiny letters underneath that it said "to yourself." And that was a message that we would get in church: die to yourself and be more like Christ. But it was just one of those moments where I was like, yeah, I don't think loving each other and loving your neighbor as yourself, this shouldn't look like that, veiled death threats, if you will. And so I think from that moment on, that really, gave me pause and opened my mind to the possibility that this wasn't the be all end all way to be and the way to act. That only continued for me as I got older, as I got into college. I very much leaned into academia, very much like Ellen. And that really introduced new schools of thought for me. And I got really involved in politics. I found that to be very interesting, that it was kind of this other avenue of social change. And so I started interning for the city of Columbus, and the city of Columbus at the time, and largely still is, run by Democrats. And it was my first time being around Democrats. And it was this very new experience because I walked in with a lot of biases and preconceived notions about what that would be like. And I was like, they're going to be mean and they're going to hate everyone and they're not going to do their jobs and they're going to be lazy. And, you know, all of these terrible stereotypes that I had learned growing up. And what I found was the literal exact opposite. I fell in love with these people so much that they were literally at my wedding, celebrating me. And they really just showed me what it was like to be a true public servant. And I was working for Community Relations Commission in neighborhoods doing racial reconciliation work with these folks and seeing their policy really come to life and heal communities. And it was just deeply impactful. And I just kind of continued that trajectory and continued to be involved all the way up until I ran for office in the 2020 cycle for state senate. It has been a journey, to say the least.
Some people are asking, what a journey. Some people, Jen and Crystal, are asking us in the chat about, how do we get more women of faith involved in fighting for reproductive freedom? And so I want to talk very specifically. I mean, me, someone, who was raised differently than you all, but my dad was a pastor for 17 years. Hello. There's lots of different ways to be a person of faith, right? And I know, Crystal, you and I have had a lot of conversations as, women growing up in different backgrounds, but, we've shared, how we connect with our faith and our values today. And so I want to confront this sort of binary idea, that like faith is on the other side of this issue or not. And I think that Simone helped us blow that open too. But first, before we get to that very important piece of this conversation, I do want to put out some calls to action here for both of these women's states. Okay, so in Wisconsin, 5 days, on Tuesday is the election for Wisconsin State Supreme Court. This is one of the most important elections in the entire country, and it's happening in 5 days. So if you know anyone in Wisconsin, it would be okay if you put me on mute right now and you call them and you text them or whatever you need to do. Anyone you know in Wisconsin, it is so important. These are low turnout elections. It's not November. It's not a normal vote year. So like seriously, that one or two friends that you call and get to vote could make the difference in the lives of millions of women in Wisconsin when it comes to reproductive freedom and all other issues that relate to our democracy. And Wisconsin plays such an outsized role politically in our country. Guess what? This impacts all of us. So please, please connect with folks in Wisconsin. Our organizers in the chat are sharing links to some videos and other pieces of content you can share over text or however you communicate in your WhatsApp groups or whatever, email with the people you know in Wisconsin. So if they're not aware of the race, that you can give them a little 30-second, 1-minute video or something like that, just to get them up to speed so they know the stakes and they're all equipped and ready to go to vote. Now in Ohio, we have a huge opportunity for all you Ohio women. Ray is dropping the link in the chat right now. This is where you can go and sign up to be a volunteer to collect signatures to get reproductive freedom on the ballot this year in Ohio. We've got to get 413,000 valid signatures by July 5th in order to get it on the ballot. And we can do that, but it's going to take all of us stepping up and going, sure, I can collect 50 signatures. I can collect 75 signatures. I can collect 1,000 signatures. Every single one of us can do our part. So if you live in Ohio and you are at least 18 years of age, then you can get your volunteer training. So just click on that link, put in your info. Someone from the Ohio Red, White, and Blue team will be in touch with you. You can sign up for your training right there. You can see events for where to sign right there. I've got petitions right here. I was just at an event tonight gathering signatures. So join me. It's actually really fun. It feels so good to collect these signatures. So you've got something to do for the women you know, or anyone you know in Ohio, Wisconsin, and North Carolina now. All these links are being dropped in the chat. So we're giving you things to do. I hate it when I go to a Zoom call and I go, well, now I'm all excited about this issue and I feel like I know so much and I'm feeling all my feelings, but like, what do I do? Not so tonight. Lots to do, lots of ways to get involved. So now I want to bring Simone and Ellen back on for this conversation. I just really want to get in on this point. This question of, sometimes people say, okay, well, we have the people over here who are for reproductive freedom. I hate it when cable news sort of will have like a religious figure come on and they represent the anti-abortion rights view. And then there'll be, someone from like a legal organization, let's say, representing the view for reproductive rights. And it's presented as this binary where if you're a person of faith, then obviously you're not for this. And so I'm just curious for people who have come from more conservative religious backgrounds, how that has kind of factored into your journey and, how you think about yourself and your values today.
I always had this idea or notion that pregnancy was complicated. My mom had a miscarriage when I was 8 years old, and I was old enough to like vividly remember that. And so I never kind of entered into pregnancy and, the notions of motherhood as being, it's so easy. It's all going to just be perfect. And, that was the case for me when I had my son. My oldest son was born with a really rare genetic disorder, was very sick when he was born. So I think, my interest peaked with my mom miscarrying and knowing that this is messy. But once I became a mom, and a mom that endured a very complicated, difficult pregnancy, I was like, this is absolutely one of the most important things for women, to be able to make these decisions on their own. And I just kind of became this very fierce voice and fierce fighter for that. And my only regret in my kind of coming of age story is that I wish I would have, I wish it wouldn't have had to happen to me first, or have to have my own experiences. I wish I could have just learned from the experiences of other women so I could be a champion even before it had to happen to me, to find my voice in that. But wherever you start, that's where you start, and it is okay, and it is great. And we are so thankful that you are here now. Whenever you come,
Amen.
We're happy to have you.
How about you, Ellen? I mean, that was certainly a huge part of Jesse Helms's brand, was all about being this traditional family values, Christian candidate. And so I'm sure that was very much part of the identity that you were told to have. So as you grew away from those political views, how did that impact your faith and values?
So I would say, growing up, I spent a lot of time in the church, and I remember attending, listening to sermons, or rather not listening to sermons because I found them really boring. And instead I would read like the book of Ruth, like over and over and over again, like every time I went to church, because I would get asked about the sermon. I'm like, well, I don't know. I was reading Ruth, and that worked. I would say for a long time, like I didn't have faith. I went on a belief diet and I didn't believe anything. And then when I was kind of at a very dark time working on my dissertation and like really reconciling my grandfather's legacy, I swear this happened. I closed my eyes and Mary was like right there. And I grew up in the Baptist church, and Mary was kind of like this, the Holy Mother was this figure that like they brought her out for like Christmas and Easter, and the rest of the year she was like not very present. And so a huge part of reawakening my faith was actually reconnecting to Mary. And I think that she's such a powerful symbol because globally there's so many representations of the Divine Mother. And so it's a way that we as women can connect to each other globally through this inspirational figure. And so she was a huge part of like reclaiming my faith.
Wow. That is not what I thought you were going to say.
Really?
I think we should have known that if you were sitting there reading Ruth over and over again, we should have known that you're going to end up being a troublemaker one day with us, causing good trouble. Simone, I would love to hear your reaction to that.
Well, I think that's at the heart of it. The journey in is different for each person, but it's so critical that we let that view out. And that's why for me, breaking out of this binary of pro-life, pro-choice is so critical, because as Crystal says, it's complex. Life is complex, and we have got to have a heart that's big enough to embrace all of the complexity. And I think Mary's a great witness for it, though I have to say I don't have much devotion to her, but I'll take anybody that helps us open our hearts to the realities that we're struggling together to understand. And we cannot have this rigid certitude, because that shuts people out. And what we need at this time is to bring everyone in with a compassionate heart that says, yes, there's room for all of us. And women can make choices for themselves. That's the thing that just drives me nuts, is not trusting women to make their best choice. I trust women.
That sounds like a good Christian value to me, or any faith value. I know. Jen, feel free to speak to that, but I also was just curious to hear from you, given where you came from and your family upbringing and where you are today. What advice do you have for other women who may be somewhere along that journey in terms of just navigating it, in terms of family conversations, and what's been helpful to you in terms of where to put your energy along the way?
Sure. Well, first, Ellen, I love that you were also asked to tell what the sermon was about, because we were too, and I never knew. I don't know.
Never knew either.
We're supposed to be good people. To what Sister Simone said, I think that, my faith journey has evolved and continues to evolve. And to be honest, I don't know where it is right now, but if I'm taking the best parts of what I learned in church when I grew up, it's compassion and it's empathy and it's connection. And I think 100% when we are compassionate and when we are making connections with people, those are the moments when our hearts are open, and those are the moments where we hear what the other person is telling us. Mm-hmm. And I think so many people are afraid to do that, or maybe don't know how to do that. As far as my own family, honestly, that door is probably closed as far as political speak. It doesn't get me anywhere. It doesn't get them anywhere. I kind of write them off as, they're an older generation, and I think there's a lot of fear and misinformation. And plus, they don't really know how to use the internet anyway. So I don't know where they hear most of the stuff they do anyway. But anyway, I think what I have found is that this community of moms that I'll do a little shout out to Kate Duffy, hi, from Moms for Mandela, which is now Motherhood for Good, has just been instrumental for me and for other moms around our state to have that connection. We talk about church as being a place where we connect. And I think for a lot of us right now, that is our church, because we're fighting for our daughters, and we're fighting for, not so much myself anymore, but we're fighting for the rights of our children to be able to make their own choices about their own bodies. And if we, I think all the time we talk about palliative care with such compassion and such grace, that when people are at the end of their lives, it's just such a kind and gracious way that we talk about it. Why can't we reframe the conversation with reproductive freedom in a compassionate way? Because every story is unique, and every woman is making the decision for their own reasons. And I feel, as a woman, as a mom, as a friend, as a member of my community, if you can go into it with a compassionate and open heart. And I'll just say one more thing too. Jen Hatmaker said the other day, you need the loud voices and you need the quiet voices. And I'm a quiet voice. I've never been involved in politics until this past year, but I just was motivated by so many things. And so if I'm a quiet voice and I can get out and knock on a door, which is not my strong suit, so many moms, you can do it because it's in you. You're moms. You can do everything. You can multitask. You can do many things at one time. You're awesome. And because we need all voices to stand up and to get the word out for how important it is that we as women are able to make our own choices, and we're fully capable. And that's our right.
I think what Jen is saying is that we need each other. And I think what Jen is saying is that we're all in this together, and that community matters so much, which, you just spoke straight into my heart, Jen. That is the very reason why I started Red Wine and Blue, and what just gives me life and energy every day in this community. Thank you for saying that. I want to thank Crystal and Jen and Simone for sharing from your hearts, being so open with your personal stories and speaking your truth with us tonight. I know you've touched so many people. I think there's like over 700 chats that's gone on in the last 50 minutes. So people have really been appreciating your words. Thank you so much. Ellen, if you could just stay on for a couple of minutes, I'd love to wrap this up with you. Ellen, I just want to hear, what was this experience like for you tonight, to share with so many people your own experience, and then to hear the similarities, maybe the similar threads of other people's experiences. How you doing?
Oh, great. This is such a fantastic space of moms and activists. And I just feel very lucky to have been a part of this conversation. And I have a great support group, going into this through my work with IPASS, a global health group, and Planned Parenthood South Atlantic. And a lot of those friends are here on the call tonight as well. And so I just feel like I've opened up and have like a whole new network of women that I'm a part of. And I'm so excited about that.
Well, I am thrilled that you are part of this community, Ellen. Now, you will always be a part of this community and always welcome here. And again, I can't wait to see you in person in Asheville this summer.
No.
And thank you so much for your courage, the vulnerability that you show as you speak to your journey. And I know that it's opened up so many hearts as well of others. My hope tonight is that we all can hear Ellen using her voice, and that we all might think, a little voice inside of all of ourselves might say, okay, well, if Jesse Helms' granddaughter can find it within her to speak up and use her voice for reproductive freedom, then maybe I can do something too. So let's be an inspiration to one another as we are in this community together. I am so grateful for all of our speakers tonight and to every single person here. It had been a minute since we did one of these national events with so many of us on the chat at one time. I missed you all, and it's been so great to be back, and we'll have more opportunities to do so soon. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful night.